The new IDF Chief Halevi takes over for Aviv Kochavi this week, and as usual, before we speak about the future, let's have a look at the key moments in his term. Jonathan Regev is here with me in the studio. Jonathan, thanks as always for coming over. So let's divide it into two. First, speak about the outgoing and then about the incoming. So Aviv Kochavi, if he was sitting here and I would have asked him what would be his main successes, main challenges during his four-year term, what would he answer?
No major escalation all throughout the borders. Yes, there was one big flare-up in Gaza, May 2021, Operation Guardian of the Walls. But all in all, that was it. The northern border, Israel's main concern, northern border with Lebanon, was practically completely quiet during his term. And not only that, there's also an agreement on the maritime border, which diffuses even more the tensions on the Lebanon border. Israel, on the northeastern border with Syria, acted almost without interference. Practically, almost whenever Israel wanted, it acted in Syria. Major success. And the Gaza border, apart from that flare-up which we spoke about in May 2021, was kept almost completely quiet during his term. Even if we look at that flare-up with the Islamic Jihad last August.
But if you remain with the operative front, so two obstacles. Iran, which on one hand, as you've mentioned, Israel operated quite freely vis-a-vis Iran in the northern front, but in Iran itself, Iran enriched uranium to much higher scales than in the past, and that happened during Kochavi's term.
Yes, the question is how much can the army do by itself? If we look at what happened in the political arena during Kochavi's practically entire term, there was almost no stable government in Israel. 5 election campaigns, one government which was there for a year and a half with total interference on behalf of the opposition. Now a new government again. There was never a responsible adult saying, that's it. Let's go to Iran right now. Let's do it. It didn't happen. It was because most of his term, the prime minister was Benjamin Netanyahu, that we know is not in love with the military adventures. Now Benjamin Netanyahu is in charge again, and maybe it will be the role of Aviv Kochavi to do the one major operation in Iran, which Kochavi didn't do.
And Jonathan, the second front is the West Bank, which was relatively quiet in the past few years until about a year ago, February of 2022, when that wave of terrorism started, and we're seeing the current operation ongoing, Operation Breakwater ongoing in the West Bank every night, and there is no end at sight.
I don't think there's going to be an end in sight. First, the operation is very successful. Again, Israeli forces operate practically every night, carry out arrests. If we spoke a few months ago about this Lion's Den, which we may look at them as a group of criminals, a youth, whatever, but they were able to kill soldiers, to kill civilians. That group was practically taken away, but it's a cycle that never ends. You take away one group, another group will arise. The military has options to a certain extent, same as in Iran. The army can operate to a certain extent. If you want to go into something bigger, either with all the force or a diplomatic option. That's up to the government. And just like in Iran, there was no stable government to take a big decision practically during Kochavi's entire term.
So let's talk about two other issues that happened during his term. One was the problematic period that he had to serve during to the coronavirus, which took place for 2 years of his 4-year term. And the second thing is the political turmoil in Israel. He had 5 political electoral campaigns, 3 or 4 different governments, not being able to form a proper budget and plan for a long term. That all happened in the past few years under his term, which made his life quite difficult.
Very difficult. There was no, just think of the amount of defense ministers that changed.
Four,
yes, and for the past 2 years or 2.5 years, it was relatively stable with Benny Gantz. Before that, it was Avigdor Lieberman. No one even remembers that. Avigdor Lieberman,
and Naftali Bennett,
and
Netanyahu itself.
All of them under Netanyahu, his rivals. And again, there was a constant rivalry between the Prime Minister's office and the Defense Minister's office, including between Netanyahu and Gantz also in their term. Politics put on a major hurdle for Aviv Kochavi, and it is felt. We speak of a budget. Israel, for 3 years did not have a budget. How can a military plan forward with no budget? And this has implications because the IDF, yes, has a major superiority when it comes to Air Force, when it comes to intelligence. Amazing success stories, absolutely. But a war, a real war, a one with Hezbollah, for example, eventually has to be won on the ground.
So you connect me to the other thing I want to speak with you. It was clear to Kochavi and to his predecessors as well that the army, the ground forces, should be prioritized because there is a huge difference between the situation of the Air Force and the intelligence and the situation of the ground forces. Kochavi tried to do that. He spoke of a decisive victory, winning every battle, etc., etc. But you feel the hesitance within the decision makers in deploying ground forces in any round of violence.
Yes, because there's an understanding that a ground incursion, certainly in Lebanon, but also in Gaza, that will come with a heavy price. Is the Israeli society still ready to pay those prices? Not so sure. Is the army ready, or are we going to see these armored vehicles going into Gaza, same as in 2014? Some of them clearly not equipped, not ready to go into battle, but they did because that's what they had, and the army is hesitant. If we spoke of Operation Guardian of the Walls, it was for 9 or 10 days. The Israeli home front took rockets and rockets and rockets, and eventually the Israeli army did not decide to go in to get that decisive victory. There are a lot of criticisms about it, and many people are saying, if you want to win, get your ground forces in, get your boots on the ground. Aviv Kochavi did not do that. There are many say implications or indications that he should. This is the path he should have gone, and Israel did eventually succeed in its military operations with the air, with intelligence, but there was no ground incursion. That's a fact.
So let's speak about Herzi Halevi, who takes over on Monday. He will have the same problems that we've just touched. He won't have coronavirus, but nobody knows what lies in the future. But one thing he will have is a different government. And I'm not saying if it's good or bad, but it's different. Many problems come with it because it's a right-wing government. We see how the Americans speak, how the Europeans speak, what's going on in the Arab world, and that brings challenges to the army itself when it comes to deploying forces, when it comes to recruitment, etc. It's a huge challenge, internal challenge for Halevi that not many of his predecessors shared and had to deal with in the past.
The army, eventually, the Israeli army, the IDF being the people's army, so the problems that the state encounters are eventually reflected in the army. And Israel is in a wide social divide. Whether you're a right-wing supporter or a left-wing supporter, I think it's clear that there's a big divide, and it's reflected in the army. And yes, it will be present there. Will all the soldiers now want to serve in an army that is governed under a ministry that has 2 ministers, because now there's a minister of defense And there's another minister in the Ministry of Defense who's in charge of military activities in the West Bank. Are all the soldiers going to be happy about that? Not so sure. Nightly incursions into the West Bank, a problem that is not being solved. Is that something that everybody will be happy with? No. On the other hand, at least on paper, it seems to be a stable government. That's something that Herzi Halevi might have. Again, this is Israeli politics, you never know. But at least on paper, it seems to be the case. Something that Aviv Kochavi did not have. A stable government that at least on paper should govern for 3 or 4 years. That should give him some kind of a backing. But on the other hand, we already heard of ministers bashing even Aviv Kochavi while he's still in office, not to mention his predecessors, Gadi Eisenkot, Benny Gantz, Gabi Ashkenazi, all of them being bashed by current politicians. The army needs the backing of the government. Let's hope that it has it, because again, this is the only army that Israel has.
Definitely, and I want to touch with you before we end, go back to Iran. Iran might change under, during the years in office of Herzi Halevi. Iran will have to decide whether it tries to break through to nuclear weapon, or go back into the one kind or another of a JCPOA, of a nuclear agreement. Halevi will have to prepare the army for a possible attack in Iran, on Iran's nuclear sites, etc., because that's inside, and that's in the cards, and that might happen, and that's in his term.
Yes, it has to happen now. In Herzi Halevi's term, 3 or 4 years now. We do not know, we cannot even assume where Iran is going to be. It's progressing since there's no nuclear agreement, since the United States backed out of it. Iran is progressing with basically no one there to stop it. And yes, it will be probably the charge of Herzi Halevi to do that. He needs the backing of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He needs the backing of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And
he needs the collaboration of the Americans and partially of the Europeans. It's not only an Israeli sole game.
And they're not in love with the new Israeli government. Let's put it this way.
It's a multi-layered problem.
It's a multi-layered problem. Israel is not by itself. The United States may tell Israel, you want our support in Iran, support us in other terms. Two-state solution, the Palestinian issue, for example. Ukraine, help us. Is the current Israeli government one that can help the Americans in this case? Not so sure.
So what can he do?
He has to prepare Herzi Halevi has to prepare the army as much as he can. But again, it's not up to Herzi Halevi by himself. The army can be excellent and can have an excellent intelligence and the most sophisticated and advanced weapons. If there's no backing from the political echelon, from the prime minister, from the defense minister, from the foreign minister, who needs to bring in all the assistance that you mentioned, from Europe, from the United States, Herzi Halevi, as talented as he may be, and he is, he cannot act by himself.